Before proceeding with the formal business of the meeting, I will ask Mr. Jasbir Singh from the Guru Nanak Gurdwara to lead us in prayer.
ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਇੱਕ ਓਂਕਾਰ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਸ੍ਰੀ ਭਗਵਤੀ ਜੀ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵਾਹ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਭਗਵਤੀ ਜੀ की पातशाही 10वीं प्रथम भगवती सिमर के गुरु नानक ਲਈ ਧਿਆਏ। ਫਿਰ ਅੰਗਦ ਗੁਰ ਤੇ ਅਮਰਦਾਸ ਰਾਮਦਾਸ ਹੋਏ ਸਹਾਏ। अर्जुन हर गोबिंद ਨੂੰ ਸਿਮਰੋ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਹਰਾਏ। ਸ੍ਰੀ ਹਰਿ ਕ੍ਰਿਸ਼ਨ ਧਿਆਈਏ ਜਿਸ ਡਿਠੇ ਸਭ ਦੁਖ ਜਾਏ। ਤੇਗ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਸਿਮਰਿਏ ਕਰ ਨੌ ਨਿਲਾਵੇ ਥਾਏ। ਸਭ ਥਾਈ ਹੋਣਾ ਸਾਏ 10ਵੇਂ ਪਾਤਸ਼ਾਹ श्री गुरु गोबिंद सिंह साहिब जी। सब थाई होना साहिब दसा पातशाह की जोत। श्री गुरु ग्रंथ साहिब के पाठ दा दे ध्यान करके बोलो जी वाहेगुरु। पंज प्यारे चार साहिबजादे 40 मुक्ते हठियां जपियां थप्पियां जिन्हां नाम जपिया वंड छकिया देख चलाई तेग विखाई देखदे एंडत किता। तिन्हां प्यारे सचारे ने प्यारे सिंहां की कमाई का ध्यान करके बोलो जी वाहेगुरु। जिन्हां ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਸਿੰਘਣੀਆਂ ਧਰਮ ਹਿੱਸੀ ਸੱਤੇ ਬੰਦ ਬੰਦ ਖਟਾਏ ਖੋਪਰੀਆਂ ਲਹਾਈਆਂ ਚੱਕਰਿਆਂ ਤੇ ਚੜੇ ਆਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਚੜਾਏ ਗਏ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੀ ਸੇਵਾ ਲਈ ਕੁਰਬਾਨੀਆਂ ਕੀਤੀਆਂ ਧਰਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਹਾਰਿਆ ਸਿੱਖੀ ਕੈਸਾ ਸਵਾਸਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਨਿਭਾਈ ਤਿਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਕਮਾਈ ਦਾ ਧਿਆਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਜੀ ਬੋਲੋ ਜੀ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ। ਪੰਜਾਂ ਤਖਤਾਂ ਸਵਤ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦਾ ਧਿਆਨ ਕਰਕੇ बोलो जी वाहेगुरु। प्रथम स्वत खालसा जी की अरदास है सर्वत खालसा जी को वाहेगुरु 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 चितावे चितावन का सदका सब सुख होवे। जहाँ जहाँ खालसा जी साहिब तहाँ तहाँ रचा रायत देख देख फतेह। विद की पैज पंथ की जीत श्री साहिब जी के खालसा जी के बोल बाले बोलो जी वाहेगुरु। सिखा नूं सिक्खी दान केस दान रहदान विवेक दान भरोसा दान ताना सरदान नाम दान श्री अमरसर दे इशनान चौंकियां झंडे बुंगे जुगो जुगो टल धर्म के जकारे बोलो जी वाहेगुरु। सिखां दा मन निमा मत उच्ची माते रखे आप अकाल पुरख वाहेगुरु। अपने पंथ दे सदा सदा दिधार जियो। श्री ननकाना साहब ते होर गुरुद्वारे खुलम जिंद पंथ विछोड़िया गया है खुले दर्शन सेवा संबंध तन खास बख्श नूं अज सतगुरु आप दे हजूर विच अरदास बेनती है जी। जो लूटन दी काउंसल दी अज मीटिंग शुरू हो रही है उन्हां नूं सफलता देनी। सही प्यारियों मेलो जिन्हां मेरा तेरे नाम चितावे नानक नाम चढ़दी कला तेरे भाणे सरबत दा भला। वाहिगुरू जी का खालसा वाहिगुरू जी की फतेह।
Thank you. Please be seated. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Council. Before we begin, would members please sit in their allocated seats, silence their mobile phones, stand up when proposing and seconding items, switch microphones on to speak and off immediately afterwards. If there is an emergency, turn left out of the chamber, follow the green emergency exit signs to the main town hall entrance and assemble in St George's Square. Please note that this meeting is being live streamed to the public and any members of the public present are entitled to take photographs, film, audio record and report on the business held in the public, but must not act in a disruptive manner. If they do so, they may be asked to leave. I invite the Director of Public Health, Sally Cartwright, to present the Annual Public Health Report 2023.
Thank you, Chair. So just while that's coming up, I'll just introduce the item. So the annual public health report, hopefully many of you are familiar with, is a statutory requirement for the Director of Public Health to produce an annual public health report every year, looking at the health of the community. So it can focus on a particular health condition or a particular topic. So this year we decided to focus on health inequalities. Obviously, it's a key issue for us in Luton, so differences in health across the borough, difference in risk factors for poor health across the borough. So particularly for this year, we decided to focus looking at maps, so looking at geographically differences in health indicators and determinants of health across the borough. And this sits well with the 2040 ambition and our work to become a town that focuses on health equity. So our work around working with Sir Michael Marmot's team in the Institute of Health Equity around health inequalities and the causes of health inequalities. So the report will be published on the website once it's been finalised here and approved. So it will be accessible for everybody to click around and have a look at it. And I'm just going to, once we get it up on the screen, go through some of the key pages and highlights from the report. There we go. Thank you. So you can skip the first 2 pages, I've just sort of covered that. Thank you. So the report goes through lots of indicators and lots of information about health inequalities in the borough. So this first map shows, let me just get it on my screen so I can see it as well. So this it may well be familiar to a lot of you already, but this shows deprivation in the borough and child poverty. So you can just see the red is where there's greater prevalence of each. When we go through the maps, the red is always worse. So it just shows where there's higher proportion of deprivation, or in this case, child poverty. And it strongly links to life expectancy. So we do tend to see where there's greater deprivation, lower life expectancy. To the next one, please. So within the full report, we look through by different factors. So looking at causes of health and causes of ill health. So we look by lifestyle factors, social and community factors, and then what we call wider determinants of health, which are employment, housing, living conditions, etc. So we've split it up into those kinds of categories. Just to give some structure to the report. So the report shows the difference in life expectancy across the borough. So you can see the difference there between the highest life expectancy and the lowest life expectancy across the borough for men and women. And then the next page just shows by across the borough, looking at the map, so looking at for men and women the difference in life expectancy across the borough. The next slide just shows the causes of those differences in life expectancy by disease. So you can look, if you look, I know you won't be able to see in detail here, but by different disease factor, which are the key diseases that cause that difference in life expectancy across the borough. But we know that there will be other factors that cause those diseases. So talking about those wider determinants of health, so the issues around housing, employment, poverty, etc., will also be factors that contribute to those disease profiles. On to the next slide. So within the full report, we have a lot of different maps broken down by different health indicators. So this one just shows for cancer. So looking at across the borough the different levels of cancer in the different wards, and just gives a bit of a profile for bowel, breast and cervical cancer, which are the key cancers that you can screen for. We've also then got some key factors around some of the lifestyle, what we call lifestyle factors, but are sort of related to the environment as well. So looking at tobacco, diet, physical activity. So there's lots of information there related to those, what we know classically as lifestyle factors. And then the next one just shows a bit more information around smoking and alcohol consumption. So the graph on the right just shows hospital admissions for alcohol consumption by ward. So again, you can see the correlation there to deprivation by ward. This next one is just around physical activity and obesity prevalence, just looking at the maps there. So you can see areas that have lower rates of physical activity and higher obesity prevalence. And then the next map just shows by ward. It's a bit of slightly messy, but you can see it more clearly when you've got the full version in front of you, but just shows some of the assets that we've got across the borough. So looking at care homes, dentists, pharmacies, GP practices, and some other wider community assets, mapping them across the borough and mapped to deprivation. So you can see that actually we've got quite a good spread of some of those health and care assets. We have a good spread of them where you'd want them to be according to deprivation and therefore health need. So just the last couple of slides, this next one just shows housing, so overcrowded housing, again mapped to the wards in the borough. So again, you can see that there's a higher proportion of overcrowded housing. It correlates well to the map of deprivation, and we know this is linked to poorer health outcomes and health inequalities. And then just the last page with some of this information just shows some information around air quality. So again, we know that this is linked to health outcomes, so looking at where there is poorer air quality across the borough. And just within the report, there's a bit more detail on these areas, but just some of the key areas of work that we have in progress to tackle health inequalities. So we are now a Marmot town, so that means that we've been working with Sir Michael Marmot and his team in the Institute of Health Equity on how we tackle some of the causes of health inequalities and focus on health equity in all the work that we do. So that's working across the system, not just from the public health team, but council and wider health system, health and care system, around focusing and prioritising on health equity. Core 20+5 is the NHS framework for tackling healthcare inequalities, but we're working closely with our NHS partners on how we address healthcare inequalities and the causes of healthcare inequalities through the framework that's called Core 20+5. Talk, Listen, Change was our big research project that we did looking at the disproportionate impact of COVID during the pandemic and beyond. So looking at what factors cause those disproportionate impacts and how we're still working on the actions around that now and still taking forward a wide-reaching action plan looking at community actions around health inequalities based on the findings from that research project. We're working closely with our colleagues in the Fairness Task Force, thinking about health equity. And we've got a big project around cancer outcomes. So again, working with our NHS colleagues, but we know that in Luton we have far poorer cancer outcomes compared to our neighbours and within the borough as well. So we're doing some really targeted focused work on cancer outcomes. We've got some cancer outreach, cancer connectors, and some other sort of transport and other initiatives looking specifically at cancer. So some really positive work there. But there's a lot more detail in the report, which will be circulated following the meeting. Thank you.
Does any member have any questions? Thank you. First off, Councillor Mahmood Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I ask you, in terms of the inequality, taking into account the COVID-19, is it made a, if we take that in terms of the inequalities, has it made a major difference in certain parts of the town where the increase is far greater than it has been for the last maybe 5 or 6 years? And my second bit is, in terms of the children obesity, is that increased tremendously, and the mental health?
So it's quite a complicated picture and difficult to absolutely say yes or no to both of those questions. I think it's likely that COVID has exacerbated inequalities, but there's lots of different factors that we need to take into account in that, and it's difficult to sort of unpick them all. It certainly hasn't helped us in the right direction. So I think where we may have not made as much progress as we would have liked, I think COVID has definitely impacted on that. And there's lots of different factors around that, and effects of mental health, effects of employment. So there's lots of different elements to that question, which is quite difficult to unpick fully. But I think it probably has not helped us progress in the right direction as much as we would like to have. Obesity and mental health are both also real areas of concern and continue to be coming out of COVID. So we know that nationally, the pandemic has had an impact on children and young people's mental health. And so it is likely that is the case in Luton as well, but we don't have the detailed figures around that. The data just isn't collected in that way for mental health and children and young people. But we know nationally that that is a big factor, so we can assume that that is the case in Luton as well. And similarly, obesity, our obesity figures are not going in the right direction for children and young people, so there is a lot of work to do there. And again, I don't think the pandemic has helped, where people weren't in school and weren't getting access to the PE classes and physical activity that they would have otherwise during the pandemic. So there's lots of complicated implications from the pandemic that we're still trying to overcome now, and still left a legacy that is making a lot of our strategies really important now to factor into that. Obesity, mental health, physical activity, all of those are really important for us to try and tackle now coming out of the pandemic.
Can I ask you, in terms of the inequality, are we targeting resources in the area of greatest need, or are we doing universally? What is our priority in terms of that? Because it is a huge problem. So, one needs to think where the greatest need is.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So that exact point is a core principle of all of the what we call the Marmot Town work. So that our work focusing on health equity. So one of Sir Michael Marmot's key principles that he has coined in all of his work is the principle of proportionate universalism. So we want universal services that everyone can access, but they need to be proportionate to the need. So there needs to be greater resource and greater emphasis put in where there is more need. So in all of our work that we're trying to do across public health strategies and work programmes, we're trying to build in those principles. So where that we know, looking at those maps, which is exactly why I wanted to do this annual report. So looking at those maps where we've got those red hotspots, we can focus more activity in those areas. So work with the schools there that we know have greater obesity prevalence, or work with the GP practices that we know have lower uptake of cancer screening. So all of those factors we're really trying to build into everything that we do. And not just geographically, but some, population breakdown, so age, ethnicity. So where we know the data shows there's greater need in a certain area or within a certain population group, then we can focus more in that area.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next up, I've got Councillor Rob Roach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of points, really. The first one is around health inequalities. We need to focus. We have a health equality going on at the moment with our dental practices. To try and get an NHS appointment for people in Luton is I don't know of one that does NHS appointments. So I think we need to focus on how we can work with these practices to try and make sure that people can get proper dental treatment. The second one really I want to talk about was following on from Councillor Hussein's point is around obesity, because we have things come through policy that I think tinker around the edges of obesity, and that's because of planning and licensing laws and all those things. What I'd really love to see is a council effort of health, public health, licensing and planning come through with a plan on how we can actually deal with the licensing and planning laws and try and find a way through that, because that's what's going to solve or help us cure or solve the obesity problem in this town. Thank you.
Thank you. So with regards to the first point around oral health, yes, absolutely, it's a challenge. So we have an oral health needs assessment that we completed a couple of years ago that show, particularly in our under fives, high prevalence of dental missing and decayed missing and filled teeth, sorry. So we're doing a lot of work around that at the moment. So we're doing work with earlier settings in schools, education, supervised toothbrushing, various programmes within sort of community events, various activities in that space. And particularly one of the ones that we've been doing is around pop-up dental clinics. So we're working with a dental health provider to come and do these pop-up clinics in the community. They've been really successful in getting people that have never seen a dentist, children and young people that have never seen a dentist, to come and get checked. But what we've been really keen to do as part of that is to try and get people to book on to sign up, register with dentists through that process. So it's not just a one-off pop-up clinic, because we are very conscious that that just puts a sticking plaster on the problem. So we're linked with a dentist that we know is taking patients and trying to book people in and register to dentists through that process. And we've had, in some of the clinics, we've had up to 80% booking and registering with a dentist, or in some of them not so positive, maybe sort of 50%. But we're now also trying to really map which dentists in Luton are taking patients working. We're in a better position because the commissioning of dentists is not national anymore, it's locally across BLMK. through the ICB. So we're working collaboratively with them to really get a picture of which dentists are taking new patients and try and get them into that dental strategy. So it's not us working in public health trying to kind of fix some problems, but actually we're working collaboratively on that. So we are working hard on that, but yes, it is a challenge, and that's a key challenge for us collectively as a health system. And the second point around obesity. Obesity is a really complicated issue that is lots of people's, it's kind of factors into lots, it's not one person's issue to solve. So we're doing lots of work around it in public health, but absolutely agree, it's planning, it's licensing, it's schools, it's, you know, it's so many people's, part of so many people's work, transport, green spaces. So we are planning to hold a big event, we're calling it a summit, so an obesity summit, where we bring all of those people together to develop actions. We've got the start of a strategy, we've got the physical activity strategy, we've got healthy weight plans, but we're going to try and bring together the whole system to develop system recognition of all of those issues that you've talked about, signing up to the same strategic approach and thinking what else we can all do as a system, thinking about early years education, all of those partners to come together and prioritise obesity as an issue.
Thank you. Next up, I've got Councillor Aslam Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just building on from what my colleagues have said, based on your presentation, cardiovascular mortality, respiratory disease, and cancer seems to be the outliers, and we know they're some of the highest in the country. I'm really pleased to see that we've signed up as a Marmot town. Hopefully that will help us to target those resources for people who need it the most, because equity is equally very important when we're looking at inequalities. My question around those outliers, when it comes to screening, it's not at the fault of those people who are not doing anything, it's the NHS and the system, and it comes back to access again. If cancer is detected early, then they could be treated better, the outcomes could be better. So again, it comes back to how we're going to work with our partners and hold them accountable, whether it's a local issue, whether it's a regional issue, or whether it's a national issue. How can we collectively make an effort to make sure that we have the right resources and they're applied at the right time? Secondly, when it comes to wider determinants of health, of course, housing is a major factor. A lot of these people are living in unbearable, overcrowded sort of houses. How is this going to help to change policy around planning? And when we talk about planning, a lot of our colleagues from opposition as well as us sit on the planning. But when you look at planning rules, health doesn't even feature. It's not part of any consideration at all. We look at, street scene, we look at noise, nothing else. And we're always told it's quasi-judicial. But how do we as a local authority influence both local and national policy? Licensing, when we talk about obesity, licensing, giving licenses to fast food is a major issue. We've been trying for past 10 years and we have not made any difference whatsoever when it comes to licensing policy. Why is that? Why can't we make any difference? We do recognize that sometimes changing people's behaviors and lifestyle takes a long time. And some of the measures that you have put in place to increase physical activity, I've seen we've got a lot more people doing park runs, cycling, and a lot of activities around school. So some of your efforts will take a little longer. We do recognize that. But influencing policy is fundamental work of what we do in this house. And I think we need to start holding people accountable, because it's a system failure rather than people failure. So could you enlighten us, what could we do locally and what could we ask our parliamentarians to do? Thank you.
Thank you. So the cancer screening point, first of all, yes, completely agree. Again, it's one of those different people play a part of the picture issues. And we have got our cancer community connectors that are trying to help inform people about uptake of screening and all of making sure people are aware it's better to get checked early and not delay going to the doctor, and all of those sort of community elements. So that's the bit that we're doing, and then absolutely it needs to be accessible and appointments available and all of those bits from the NHS side. So we do work closely with our NHS partners on that. and it's part of the Luton Cancer Outcomes project that I mentioned that we're very much linked into, and key lead for one of the work streams on that around prevention and screening. So we're doing a lot of work in that area, and hopefully those figures will start to increase. Housing, we have, it's one of our key areas of work that we're trying to work collaboratively with our housing colleagues on as part of our Marmot Town work. And I've just come from a meeting just now actually thinking about more that we could do in that space, linking housing and health, and thinking about quality housing and identification, working in neighbourhoods around housing. So we're trying to develop some key areas of work around that, linking public health and housing, and how we can get that some more tangible projects in that area, because we do keep talking about it, and it's difficult to, because it's big complex system stuff that we're just trying to work through. What actually linked to the Marmot Town work we will be doing in that space. And then the last bit I just wanted to mention was the opportunity that we have coming up with the local plan, and that difference it will make around healthy policy as part of the local plan, and being able to influence the local plan and the planning licensing from the public health side through the local plan, and being able to do health impact assessments and influence the health implications of planning through that process. So we have got a few things in process around that, but they take time to work through. And the local plan, the timeline is not immediate, so we'll have to keep revisiting that through conversations with the planning teams.
Thank you. Councillor Tubshaw?
Yeah, I welcome the report, Chair. I don't know whether you'll be answering it tonight or not. One of the ways where we can improve people's health is by targeting. And how much can you break the figures down in areas? A perfect example would be Southboard. If you went round Arthur Street and everything at the bottom of Southboard, where I think 40, I might get the figures a little bit out, 52% of the 19.8% of the rented properties are all in that area at the bottom of Southboard. You got the top of Southboard where you got Ludlow Avenue and everything else. You're not going to get the same results if you did monitoring there. If you went up Biscot Road, if you went from this end up Biscot Road, turn right down Alexander Avenue and everything else, you're not going to get the same results would be if you turn left down any of the little streets down there. If, say, we decide, we had a brilliant policy a few years ago where we did targeted home improvement grants, but one of the problems was we could only do it on a ward at a time, and we didn't necessarily get to all the worst housing because it had to be in Biscot Ward or Berry Park Ward as it was then. Would it be possible for the figures to be broke down into smaller areas within the wards? You take Poets Ward, you'll get a different result on Eldon Road and Ayhurst than you would from Shakespeare, Macaulay and all that. So how much could we break the figures down? So if we are doing targeted work, we could do it where it's really needed instead of just spreading it right across the ward. I mean, a perfect one would be the Eco 2 grant sort of coming out soon, where if we could target the insulation and everything on the worst housing in the town. At the moment, we can't do that because we only get the figures ward-wise, and that isn't necessarily where you want to target. So how much can you break the figures down for us?
So for some things, you would be able to break it down to a smaller area. We call it lower super output area, but I don't know which, off the top of my head, which bits of data you can do that for, depending on what's accessible. And then I think we'd probably just have to think about where we'd want to start. So it would be quite labour intensive to do it for everything. So do we want to focus on just one particular, test it out with one particular area first and work it up? So I'll come back to you on that. I'll have a look at what we can do.
If you could we test it out in South? Because we've got an easy demarcation there, and we've also got the licensing scheme coming in, and we know the bottom half of it round Park Town, Arthur Street and everything else, compared to Ludlow Avenue up at the top. You're going to get two different sets of results. So Southboard would be a good one to start targeting and see how we can work it out.
I'll take that away and have a look at what's possible. I'll speak to the analysts. Thanks.
Okay, next up I've got Councillor Jackie Burnett.
Hi Sally, thanks for the report. I just wanted to ask a question around prevention. I know from some information I gathered somewhere that the money that costs health for somebody from the age of 50 to 75 is £250,000 for one person. It costs. So I just wanted to know, what work are we doing with regards to the cause of the ill health? And a lot of things is behaviour and food. I don't see any, I mean, I'm picking things up within the community that there is more analysis going on and about the type of food we eat. Is it processed? Those things that are more organic compared to mass farming. All that sort of stuff is really important, because a lot of people, and I remember my parents saying that the food don't taste like as it used to because it's mass produced. It has no nutritional benefit. So my concern is that we're looking at the end, but we're not going back to the food and what people eat to sustain them. So are we going to do any work on that, given the amount of fast food shops that we've got in our time? And we're not going to change that overnight. But at the end of the day, we do need to start systematically getting people to think about the quality of what they're eating, the nutritional benefit of what they're eating, given there is a link, given we've got high blood pressure and diabetes, and there are certain food groups that helps with that, release the sugar slowly, or that needs to be shared wider so people take responsibility as best as they can for their health. And I just wondered, are we doing anything on that? What we put in our body affects what comes out. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So we previously had, you may remember, we called it the food plan at the time, which was a lot of that education in schools, working with fast food restaurants to make healthier options available. I think we called it Tuck In at the time. Various projects around grow your own, education. We've done an evaluation of that work, and it largely looked positive, and we're just refreshing that now. So again, coming back to some of the other points that have been raised, coming out of COVID, where we can refocus on some of these strategies where we know we really need to focus our attention again. We're refreshing our food plan, but we will be calling it a food strategy to encompass all of those bits that you've talked about, also encompass the conversation around licensing, planning, thinking about the obesity summit. So they're all interlinked, and we absolutely will be doing a lot of focus work in that area now, but linking the food strategy, the physical activity strategy, the obesity work all together. But particularly, we will be refreshing the food strategy and the healthy advertising policy that we saw come through recently in conversations. That's part of that plan as well. So there's a lot of work in that area, all interlinked, but absolutely, yes, we will be. And I'll, as the food strategy itself develops, we can keep you updated on that.
Okay, next I've got Councillor Steve Stevens.
Whether there's any linking that's been done with regard to exercise and sport, to see if that's have any impact on health and the way that we exercise on the heart condition. So is there any way of actually seeing how we can bring in the lifestyle of the residents, and not only looking at the factors such as what particular health, whether it's in a deprived area or an affluent area, but also the issues about how people look after their well-being in the general sense, to do with activity, walking, other aspects.
Yes, thank you. So we are also refreshing our physical activity strategy, which picks up a lot of those issues as well. So physical activity, we know, is partly personal choice and lifestyle, but it's also about access to green space and safe walking around, feeling safe walking around, active travel, all of those elements, and how motivated people are to take up active travel, how easy it is. So all of those elements are part of our physical activity strategy, and linking in all the partners that that relates to. So yes, we are doing work in that field, and the physical activity strategy also then links into access to sporting facilities and how accessible that is for young people, families, walking routes around parks. So it's all part of the physical activity strategy. So we're out to consultation actually in the near future on the second round of the physical activity strategy. There'll be an opportunity to input into that as it comes out. So yes, thank you. We are and continue to do targeted work in that area. So it's part of it's around access to sport, part of it is around daily living and how we build physical activity into our lifestyle, and whether that's accessible to different, older people, younger people, different ethnic minority groups, culturally sensitive, all of those elements. So we're trying to make it targeted but also universal. Yeah, thank you.
Are there any further questions from members? Councillor Maria Lavelle.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sally, thank you for the report. I'm just a bit concerned about the breast cancer rates. That's quite high for Luton, 19.3. And is there any other interventions that that we could look at? Bringing it down, creating more awareness. And I'm thinking even maybe in high schools or anything that we could do, because it's quite a high rate, for women in Luton. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So breast cancer is one of the 3 cancers that you can be screened for. So there is the point around promoting breast screening, making sure that that's accessible, making sure people know about it and aren't scared to access it. So again, linking back to our cancer community connectors who are working in the community to be doing health education in the community around cancer broadly, but breast cancer particularly is one of those cancers. So we are doing work in that area, but I think we could probably be doing more working with women's groups and making sure people are educated around that they can get screened and that it is safe and it is something that is worth doing. There are benefits to it. So I think we're building on that and doing more, but particularly around women's groups, we will look at making sure we do more around
that. Any further questions from members? Thank you very much for presenting to us this evening, Sally. You are most welcome to stay for the remainder of the meeting. However, feel free to leave if you wish to do so. The first item of business is to receive the minutes of the meeting of the Council meeting held on 23rd of May 2023 as set out on pages 6 to 42. If any member objects, please indicate. Otherwise, I will assume all members are in agreement. Are there any apologies for absence from this meeting?
We have a number of apologies, Mr. Mayor. We have apologies from Councillor Abbas, Councillor Franks, Councillor Farouk, Aliyah Khan, Councillor Miller, Councillor Nazir and Councillor Salim.
Members, please note that voting will be by exception. Rather than calling out each member's name to record their vote, I will ask members to indicate if they wish to vote against a motion. If no member votes against, I will declare the item carried. The outcomes will not be recorded in the minutes unless 6 members of the Council indicate that they wish for this to happen, in accordance with Standing Orders 21.2. It is my pleasure to advise the Council that 3 new corporate directors have recently joined us. Dheeraj Chibba joins us as Corporate Director, Children, Families and Education Services. Gerard McLeave as Corporate Director for Inclusive Economy, and Nick Platts as Corporate Director for Luton Rising. Both Gerard and Nick are here tonight. Gerard, could you please make yourself known? Thank you. And now Nick, please. Thank you. A very warm welcome to Luton to you all, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Please note that I propose to take an item of urgent business in accordance with section 100B, bracket 4B of the Local Government Act 1972, immediately after the notice of motion as agenda item 14.2 on the proposed closure of ticket offices at Luton train station. The proposed resolution has been circulated around the chamber.
So, section 106 disclosures. All members of the council have been circulated with a list of items before the council this evening, which fall within the ambit of section 106 of the Local Government and Finance Act of 1992. Any member affected should disclose the fact and refrain from voting on any question relating to those items. I can confirm tonight, Mr. Mayor, we've received no section 106 disclosures.
With regard to agenda item 5, there are no written questions.
Sorry.
Yes,
Councillor Bridget. Mr. Mayor,
sorry, can I ask you to stand? Sorry.
oh, my apologies, yeah. In relation to item number 8, I'd like to declare a personal interest that I'm a Luton Town Football Club season ticket holder, and I'd like to seek perhaps guidance from the monitoring officer as to whether that would also be considered a prejudicial interest. I don't think it is, but I'd like to seek.
Mr. Mayor, I think as a matter of principle that we've adopted the view that if somebody is a season ticket holder, that should be treated as a personal and prejudicial interest.
In which case I'll declare that as a personal and prejudicial interest.
Thank you. Regard to agenda item 6, there are no written questions this evening for the Bedfordshire Fire and Rescue Authority. There is no report of the Bedfordshire Fire and Rescue Authority on the agenda item this evening. The next item is agenda item 7, annual report of the Executive Leader on decisions made by the Executive under special urgency. Would Councillor Simmons please move the recommendations?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the report. It's a formal move. I think the various items on the agenda speak for themselves. Okay. Thank you.
Is the motion seconded?
Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions? Are there any amendments? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? So the motion is before, the motion is before the council. Does any member vote against the proposal? The motion is carried. The next agenda item is 9.1, a recommendation from the Scrutiny Health and Social Care Review Group on an appointment. Sorry.
This one on, so the Kenilworth Road.
Oh, I skipped a page. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that, folks. On to the topic of Kenilworth Road. The next item is agenda item 8.1, a recommendation from the Executive on emergency works around Kenilworth Road. Would Councillor Javed Hussain please move the recommendations?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move recommendation set out paragraph 2 on page 46.
Is the motion seconded? Are there any questions? Sorry, Councillor Stevens, did you raise your hand?
Yes, there is a question on page 47 under point number 10, A and B. And I'd just like to ask if there's any progress with the discussions that have taken place as to whether the club are willing to make a contribution to the cost, and discussions also with the police. Have we come to any conclusion now?
So discussions will be ongoing. We hope to discussions. So what we've done is we're making the payments from reserves to make sure that we don't delay. So we're in order with that. We're ready to play matches on the first day. Obviously, it's been delayed the first game. But beyond this, yes, some of these costs will be recouped and recharged, and that discussion will happen post, so that we can get the works done, get everything in it. But there'll be discussions to recharge some of these costs back to the club. So those discussions haven't carried on in order not to delay any of the works.
Okay, are there any further questions? So, are there any amendments? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? The motion is before the council. Does any member vote against the proposal? The motion is carried. Okay. So the next item, agenda item, is 9.1, a recommendation from the Scrutiny Health and Review Social Care Review Group on an appointment to the Joint Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Would Councillor Underwood please move the recommendation?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I move the recommendation as detailed on page 51 and 52. Thank you.
Thank you. Is the motion seconded? Thank you. Are there any questions? Are there any amendments? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? The motion is before the council. Does any member vote against the proposal? Motion is carried. The next agenda item is 10.1, extension of 9-month interim appointments. I'll call upon Councillor Simmons to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The report really is very self-explanatory, and the requests are to extend the interim appointments until 31st of March next year, and I would ask Council to approve that.
Is the motion seconded?
Seconded, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions? Are there any amendments? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? The motion is before the council. Does any member vote against the proposal? The motion is carried. The next item is agenda item 10.2, revision to the council's senior management structure. I call upon Councillor Simmons to move the recommendation.
And again, I think this report is self-explanatory and explains that we wish to change the constitution to include a new post of Service Director, Information Technology, and I would ask Council to approve that.
Is the motion seconded?
Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions? Are there any amendments? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? The motion is before council. Does any member vote against the proposal? The motion is carried. The next item is agenda item 11.1, Scrutiny Annual Report 2022-2023. I call upon Councillor Wynne to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like, though, as the new chair of OSB, before I formally move the item, to thank my predecessor, ex-councillor Anna Pedersen, together with her vice chair. They both served on OSB over a significant period of time, and I think that we owe them a vote of thanks for the work that they've done with OSB over those years. One other comment that perhaps is worthwhile is that I think we as a council should be proud of the way in which OSB and Scrutiny has worked within this council, and the fact that all of the members present have continuously supported the scrutiny process being a cross-party and impartial look at what is the affairs of the council. So I would like to thank all the members that have been involved.
Thank you.
Now, formally, I would like to say that I move the recommendation as set out in paragraph 2 on page 58 of the minutes of the agenda.
Thank you. Is the motion seconded? Are there any questions? Are there any amendments? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? The motion is before the council. Does any member vote against the proposal? The motion is carried. So the next item is agenda item 11.2, membership of Scrutiny Finance Review Group. I call upon Councillor Simmons to move the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And this is to include Councillor Zainab Raja into the membership of Scrutiny Finance Review Group due to it being omitted at the annual meeting. So it's just a correction to the message. Okay, so I ask members to support that.
Is the motion seconded?
Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions? Are there any amendments? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? The motion is before the council. Does any member vote against the proposal? The motion is carried. The next item is the adoption of protocols into the council constitution. I call upon Councillor Javeri Hussain to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the recommendation as set out at paragraph 2, Roman numeral 1 and paragraph 2, Roman numeral 2 on page 86.
Is the motion seconded? Are there any questions? Are there any amendments? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? The motion is before council. Does any member vote against the proposal? The motion is carried. I call upon Councillor Basit Mahmood to present the Bedfordshire Police and Crime Panel Annual Activity Report 2022-2023 as set out on pages 90 to 97.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move the recommendation set out at paragraph 2 on page 90.
Is the motion seconded? Are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Steve Moore.
Just a note on the appendix of that, under item 2.1, the panel membership, it says that for the year 22-23, the members, well, the member basically from the Liberal Democrat Party was Amjad, and it was myself, which is something I've made as of this evening. The Jeremy from who runs that is now aware of. I've emailed him tonight to get that changed, if possible.
Yeah, we can. That can be done. Yes, that will be corrected. Any further questions? Okay. Does the council receive the report? Yeah. Thank you. So the next item of business is the notice of motion set out at agenda item 14.1. I call upon, yes, Councillor James Taylor.
Sorry, could I just declare an interest in this as I'm employed in the industry referred to within the motion, so I'll leave the room.
Thank you. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would have hoped this would have united the council tonight, all parties, because in 2011, in that great Liberal manifesto for that election, before they went off and joined the Tories, they actually had in there to do away with leasehold and take on board commonhold.
Sorry, 1 second, Tom.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. As a landlord, I need to declare an interest. So
shouldn't need to.
And Jackie.
And is that
okay? Just for the record, a couple of members are going to leave the chamber because they've declared an interest in this motion. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I've got an interest in this item.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, yep. If you just hold on, Councillor Shaw, while the said members leave the chamber. Just give them a second.
A lot of rich people in this council chamber, isn't there?
Okay, once again, I call upon Councillor Shaw to move the motion.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. In 2011, the Liberals put in their manifesto about Commonhold doing away with leasehold. Never happened. 2015, the Tories, the Liberals, both put it in the manifesto. Never happened. 2019, that great Jeremy Corbyn manifesto, he had it in there, and the Tories had it in there as well. So I always knew the Tories were joining in and coming with the rest of us over to the left, but you had it in your manifesto. What leasehold does, it gives companies the power to basically control people's lives after they bought a property off them. And it's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. Commonhold will give those people the power to actually control what happens in the blocks of flats and the houses they're in. What you've got to remember, leasehold, when it came in many years ago, was normally aimed at flats. But then the great people in the city realised how just how much money could be involved in leasehold. And now leaseholds are put together and traded as a commodity in the city. It's just fundamentally wrong. But some of the bigger companies, some of the bigger housing companies, even changed it. So leasehold went on to houses, individual properties, so they could sell them on in the... But Commonhold would mean the people running the cells. What happen with leasehold, they appoint a management company. And it's amazing how many times the people from the building company are members of the leasehold company who have got members on the management company looking after those block of flats. So the money just keeps going round in a circle to the same people. Under Commonhold, the people that live in those blocks of flats themselves would determine what services they want, how long it was for, and everything else. I mean, you've got blocks in Luton now that are being charged £12 a week with 900 flats in it, £12 a week for management fees. You add that up, say with the new football club development, 1,000 flats on there, at just £10 a week for the year, how much money is going into the leasehold and the management company? Our view is, and I know it's a long motion, but it needs to be, because there's been laws over the years and everything else, that we should be supporting the people what have been ripped off on leasehold and ripped off by some of the management company fees what are charged in some of those blocks. I like the old councils to support it. That's why I went back and read your manifesto to make sure it was right in 2011. And you say, as Jeremy Corbyn's absolutely brilliant manifesto, it really shocked me when I found out that the Tories had the same thing in their manifesto. So you must really like Jeremy, mustn't you? You must have liked him. I hope we can do this and put planners on, put pressure on the planners, because one of the questions they always ask with blocks of flats is they need to know the name of the management company and they need to see that a management company will be formed. My view is, yes, you can form a management company for 12 months, but in the change in our local plan, what we could turn around and say is, but in 12 months' time, after the first occupation, we want to see a management company and we want to see the leasehold transferred to Commonhold for the people that live in those blocks. And that could be built in from the contracts from the very beginning. It could be built in to when we're giving development consent. We could build it in and make it happen. So I hope we can get full support right across the council chamber. It'll stop people being ripped off. It won't change it overnight. This is a motion that's going to a lot of councils up and down the country, put out by the cooperative society to try and get more co-ops set up in all buildings up and down the country. So I'm not going to read out every word, but please think about what you're voting for. I hope you can all support it, because It's been in every party's manifesto, but none of the buggers have done anything about it at all because it's too difficult and they don't want to take the city on. I'm saying let's ask our MPs to raise it in Parliament. I don't care about the city, and let's have a go and see if we can get someone to actually take the city on and give us what's been in every party's manifesto sometime in the last 14, 15 years. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just please, could I ask members to be mindful of some of the words they choose to use in the chamber? Thank you. Is the motion seconded? Are there any questions? Are there any amendments? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? Okay, first I've got Councillor Lee Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, broadly supportive of this motion, although I would like to mention that while Councillor Shaw mentioned how the coalition government and the Conservative governments haven't managed to reform and abolish the Leasehold Act, neither was the Labour Party, despite Labour Minister for London and Construction, Nick Rainsford, giving a pledge in 1998, and yet several years of Labour government later, it wasn't done. But yeah, other than that, I support them.
Sorry, did you raise your hand, Councillor Ali?
Yes, I did.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, just a note to support the motion. I think, to be honest, leaseholds are pretty archaic and do need an overhaul. And absolutely, in terms of if you look at some of our constituents that are entangled in some of these leasehold arrangements, are suffering. And I think it's totally unfair. And myself and I would urge my colleagues to actually support this motion as well.
Thank you. Are there any amendments? So, does any member wish to speak to the motion? Anyone else? Thank you. So the motion is before the council. Does any member vote against the proposals? The motion is carried. The next item of business is the notice of motion set out at agenda item 14.2. I call upon Councillor Amjad Ali to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I propose to move the motion set out on page 5. Apologies, it does say Councillor Franks. However, he's had to submit his apologies, so therefore I'm popping in. So that's it for item 2, agenda on page 5.
Is the motion seconded?
Seconded, Mr. Mayor, and I reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Are there any amendments? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and we will be supporting this motion tonight. And I welcome the opportunity to talk briefly about Thames Water and the Tory sewage scandal. We currently have leaks leading to water shortages, sewage pollution in our rivers, lakes and seas, and ever-rising debt in the water industry. Now, this is a result of failed Tory policy, putting private profit above the public interest, handing our water industry to private enterprise at a knockdown price alongside the entire infrastructure that serves our nation. The Conservative government has given the green light for water companies to neglect our vital infrastructure and to dump sewage in our waterways. Since 2016, 1,276 years worth of raw sewage has been dumped in our British waters. And in 2022 alone, there were 824 sewage dumps a day across the country, and that includes discharges into rivers in Luton, into the River Lee. And yet, despite this, shareholders being allowed to walk away with billions in dividends, and bosses being allowed to walk away with bumper bonuses. Last year, 1.4 billion was paid out to shareholders, with 45.2 million being paid in internal dividends to the consortium that own Thames Water. That's up to March this year. Failures to improve the situation with our waterways, with sewage, must be paid from these company dividends, not by pushing the cost onto Lutonians who pay their bills, or by reducing investment in our infrastructure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any further questions from members? The motion is before the council. Does any member vote against the proposal? Okay. The motion is carried. Okay. The next item is a matter of urgent business, a proposed urgent resolution on the proposed closure of ticket offices at Luton's train stations. I call upon Councillor Simmons to move the resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On July the 5th this year, the Rail Delivery Group announced a consultation on the closure of railway station ticket offices. This consultation could ultimately mean the closure of over 1,000 ticket offices and a possible 2,000 job cuts, all being done in the name of efficiency. The public consultation will only run for 3 weeks, closing on the 26th of July. So it is important that we respond urgently, hence the reason for coming before you tonight with an emergency resolution. Also, it would appear that the Rail Delivery Group have already made their mind up before the results of the consultation are known. In the Sunday Times recently, they reported that they had seen confidential documents sending out proposals by the train operators to cut staffing at stations by October this year. This could mean the possibility of the largest number of job losses since privatisation. But what about the effect on passengers, who will be forced to purchase tickets online or at a ticket vending machine at the station, which will cause difficulties for many, especially for passengers who need advice and guidance on ensuring they buy the cheapest and best ticket for their journey? Especially important, as according to the Rail Retailers Association, there are 2,822 ticket types on National Rail, with 901 unique ticket names and 1,288 route codes. We know that over 40% of people over 75 and over 3 million people over 65 do not use the internet, and that over 23% of disabled people have no access to the internet. This will therefore make online purchase inaccessible for many passengers. Having staff that are visible at station ticket offices is critical for passenger safety, not only to deal with law-abiding and with any law breaking or antisocial behaviour, but also to help with health and safety issues. The advantage of ticket offices also means that you can go and ask someone to guide you on your purchase, and if they close, many people will struggle to travel. This is all being done to modernise customer services, but at what cost? Many groups representing the vulnerable and blind have spoken out against this, which seems to be part of ongoing plans to dehumanise services. We have all seen the gradual chipping away of our daily contact with service people. For example, the closures of banks and the introduction of self-service checkouts. Surely technology should be used to make our lives better, rather than just reducing human contact, which is essential to us all. Every time a machine replaces what was human contact, an opportunity to connect with someone is lost. You may not think brief encounters at a supermarket checkout can help that much, but research has found that a 30-second exchange in a coffee shop makes you feel happier and more connected. This connection will be lost with the closure of ticket offices. Here in Luton, we all know how long we have waited for work to be done at the central station and the inaccessibility of Leagrave Station. Today, we need stations that are fit for the future as part of our work on climate change and improving sustainable travel. If the stations are allowed to further decline by closing facilities like the ticket offices, it will undermine the agenda and could give the government and rail companies another reason to avoid investing in Luton stations. Therefore, I hope that this motion gets support across party so that we give a clear message to the government and to the rail delivery group that we oppose their plans to close station ticket offices and ask them to rethink their proposal. I move the resolution.
Is the motion seconded?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor. Seconded, Mr. Mayor, and I reserve the right.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Are there any amendments? Does any member wish to speak to the motion? Okay, first I've got Councillor Dave Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on the last paragraph, Hazel, you put go via Thameslink Railway. They don't sell tickets. It's the rail delivery group. Apart from that,
Members will, sorry, Dave,
yeah.
I'm assuming members will accept that that was an error and that we can amend that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to continue what you were saying, Hazel, about this removal of ticket offices, closing them is discriminatory because a lot of people rely on going to the ticket office to purchase their ticket. And it can be difficult for someone using a ticket machine. I must admit, I've used a ticket machine in the past and bought the wrong ticket. And it's not until I got to the other end that the actual ticket inspector says you bought the wrong ticket. So I had to buy another ticket and then return back. It was my fault. It was my fault. But I see that the smartphones now are pretty popular amongst people, and I see them at the station. I see them getting on the bus and going bleeping. How does that work? I'm not the only one. Come admit it. I'm not the only one that's not able to do that yet. I might eventually learn how to do it. But then you've got the nonsense that coming from the rail delivery group about, oh, we're going to close ticket offices, but we're going to have people to assist you on the platforms. Don't they realise you have to buy a ticket before you get onto the platform? That's the nonsense of it all. And we've got the current situation with the rail unions and the rail companies about overtime working. They're not working overtime. But rather than employ additional drivers, they're quite willing to pay overtime rates to the drivers that they've already got. When they decide to take up their statutory right not to go on overtime, then they're the villains of the piece. But I do support this, and I was there on Saturday outside the railway station with Rachel Hopkins. And we didn't really have to work hard to get people to sign the petition. They were just coming to us. So I support the motion, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Next, I've got Councillor Amjad Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Talking about contact, human contact, I mean, wherever we go in society nowadays, unfortunately, we're losing more of that humanity within our transactions. I personally fully support this, and I think it's disgraceful for a town like Luton, which requires more investment within our infrastructure, within our train stations, that they are now pulling resources out and trying to make more money out of it when the opposite should be happening. And so I urge my colleagues as well to actually support the motion.
Councillor Jackie Burnett, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I totally support the motion. And I recently had an experience. I was in London. This is after the train operators have made this about availability of staff. And I was actually sick in London. I got off the station and I was on Farringdon. So I got off the train. I'm actually on Farringdon station and I took sick. And you know what? My family pressed that emergency and we're still waiting. They never turned up. So I don't know what's going to happen in the future. Yeah, they didn't turn up. It took ages to get assistance. My nephew had to go. And when the person came down, my friend said, oh, we pressed that button and then it didn't go through. And the member of staff said, it's got nothing to do with us. That's another part of the system. It has got nothing to do with us and it goes somewhere else. And my friend said, but if my friend had taken sick and had a heart attack, they would have been dead by now. And that's where we're at. That is where we are at society, and it's a really sad shame. And you know, like the motion earlier, this is all about profit. This is all about increasing the profit for the few at the expense of the many. Like if you go to the station now to park, has anybody been to the parking now? You can't do contactless. You got to do a QR code. Then you got to wait for it to come up. So good luck, Dave, when you're trying to get there. You got to get, and if the signal's not good, yeah, it doesn't come up, and you're pressing on your camera, and it don't happen. So you go to the ticket office, and they say, "Oh, you got 24 hours, and this is the number to give you." Now, if the ticket staff ain't there, they're not going to give somebody who ain't got a smartphone the number to phone within 24 hours. But this is the sad state of affairs. Not every, and we've had no ends of discussion about this since I've been on the council about digital, and we've not, well, we've pushed back, and it's been forced down us at no choice. But we are human beings, and I'm glad we've moved in this motion, and I'm glad there seems to be a cross-party support, because if we don't fight, God help the next generation to be, if you haven't got this, we're excluding a whole society for taking part in it. They are totally excluded if you cannot afford this. If you cannot afford a smartphone, oh yeah, and how much are they now? Oh, £1,000, yeah? Because you see them all folded up, and the young people, they're all into it. But if you haven't got £1,000 for a smartphone, how you gonna get your ticket? But that's the £1,000. We're in cost of living crisis, and a smartphone is £1,000. And these are workers who, some of them maybe cannot afford £1,000 for a smartphone. They're going to lose their job, and they're struggling to feed their family. And I don't trust the government. They're not going to get no job. They're going to be doing 0-hour contract. They had secure work. They can plan. And that is being taken away for them for the benefit of the few up there in the ether that nobody sees. So thank you for moving the motion, but I had to just share my experience. Yeah, being sick, there was I couldn't even get a bottle of water. I wanted water, and it was still waiting. That's what we're dealing with nowadays. So if you're sick, God help you.
Okay, next up we've got Councillor Ummi Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fully support this motion. I worked as a carer for people with learning disabilities for a few years, and a lot of the people that we cared for wanted to go out on the train and socialise, and we'd take them out on the trains, and it would be a really, really nice day out. But they often found it really distressing to try to use ticket machines. They wouldn't be able to use the app on their phones without lots of support. And taking away the ticket offices really would take away the independence of people with disabilities, learning difficulties, things like autism. So I fully support this notion because, again, like Hazel said, the interaction that you have with the ticket officers might be the only thing that the only person they speak to throughout the entire day. So this proposal to take them away is really just going to hit the most vulnerable and the disabled the hardest, when the last few years everything that's happened has hit them the hardest. So I fully support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor David Wynne.
Mr. Mayor, I fully support this motion, but perhaps a word of warning, which is pots and kettles, because very recently, we as a council have changed the way in which residents' parking permits operate. We have taken away exactly the same sort of facility that we are now condemning in terms of the railways. I support the motion, don't get me wrong, but what we've done to our residents with moving them onto smartphones, visitors' permits that have to be booked through smartphones, no physical permits in the front of cars, no easy way for a resident to be able to check whether somebody has got a permit to park their car in the resident-only bay. I'm afraid that I support the motion, but we're very far from clean ourselves as a council, I'm afraid.
Right, James, okay, sorry, if any other members wish to speak, just clearly raise your hand so I know you're waiting. So, Councillor James Taylor.
Right to go, Aslan. Yes. I'll be brief as I can because I think this does have good cross-party support. Nice to see it being across the aisle as well. This proposal will push forward for one reason and one reason only, to save money. They can try and dress it up as improving passenger service in the press releases, but everybody knows this is not true. And I think it's symptomatic of 13 years of Tory underinvestment in our public services. They've been deliberately allowed to decay and rot. And this is particularly galling for us in Luton as we look at our decrepit station, which has been crying out for investment for decades. And now they're taking away the one part of the station's infrastructure, which is good, which is the helpful and friendly staff behind the counter. I would also express concern at the speed at which they are attempting to force this through. Just 3 weeks of public consultation, which could shut nearly every ticket office in the country. How they can possibly think that they're going to reach out to as many people that Ume has highlighted as well for those responses, I don't think they can. So I was pleased to see Labour's northern mayors challenging the rail delivery group on this in court, and I'll hope for a positive outcome. In a town with a community as diverse as ours, it is vitally important for many people to be able to talk to an actual human to help them understand their ticket requirement, route options, or they may not be comfortable using IT systems. And so I'm sure many of us know that people that work at the station, they're drawn from across our community. They may have special language skills which they can help people with their needs. And if the government thinks that our ticket offices are not used, I would invite them to come down to the station tomorrow morning and see the queue of people snaking through the hall and the staff working diligently behind their desks. So as demonstrated by this government so many times before, they know the cost of everything but the value of nothing. So I would urge all members to support the motion. Thank you.
Are there any further questions from members or comments? Okay. Councillor Simmons, would you like to respond to some of the comments? Okay, thank you. The motion is before the council. Does any member vote against the proposal? The motion is carried. That concludes the business for this meeting. I thank you for your attendance.